Silence. That's what death sounds like in a mansion. Across America, from Newport to San Francisco, the great houses are falling. The breakers given away. Marble House donated. White Marsh Hall demolished. Linwood Hall rotting. Hearst Castle abandoned. 50-room cottages sold for pennies, carved into apartments or reduced to rubble. The Gilded Age built over 300 palatial estates. By 1980, fewer than a dozen remain in private hands. Most are museums, many are universities, some are just memories and empty lots. Except one. Biltmore. 250 rooms, 178,926 square feet, built in 1895, still standing, still private, still owned by the family that built it, still profitable. Beautiful, yes, but that's not why it survived. Behind these limestone walls is a story every other mansion owner refused to accept. Pride kills, pragmatism saves. To survive, the Vanderbilts had to do what no other Gilded Age family would: open their private palace to the public, sell 2/3 of their land, and choose humility over heritage. Then taxes, depression, war. To keep the dream alive, one woman must make the choice her peers cannot: transform a monument to ego into a business, a museum instead of a home, service instead of exclusivity. And there's more: a widow who saved what men built and lost, a forest that paid for a palace, and a decision made in 1930 that every other estate refused until it was too late. Can a monument to wealth survive when wealth itself becomes a crime? And the real question: why did Biltmore survive when the breakers, Marble House, Hearst Castle, and 100 other palaces fell? And what did survival cost the family who chose adaptation over pride? If you enjoy deep investigations into Gilded Age architecture and the choices that determined which monuments endured and which crumbled, please like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments which fallen mansion you want explored next. Your support makes these detailed stories possible. Thank you for being here. Let's begin. To understand why Biltmore survived, you must first understand why it was built differently. The Gilded Age, roughly 1870 to 1900, was America's era of unprecedented wealth concentration. Industrialization created fortunes that dwarfed anything in American history. Railroads, steel, oil, banking, these industries minted millionaires by the dozen and billionaires by name: Vanderbilt, Carnegie, Rockefeller, Morgan. And the very wealthy did what the very wealthy have always done: they built monuments to prove they mattered. Newport, Rhode Island became the summer capital of American aristocracy. Cottages, the ironic name for mansions with 50-plus rooms, lined the cliffs overlooking the Atlantic. New York's Fifth Avenue became Millionaires' Row, palatial residences competing for grandeur, each trying to outdo the last. The pattern was consistent: build the largest house you can afford, fill it with European art, host lavish parties, demonstrate your wealth, die, watch your heirs lose it within a generation. But George Washington Vanderbilt II was different. Born in 1862, George was the youngest son of William Henry Vanderbilt, who inherited the Commodore's railroad fortune and doubled it. George's share was approximately $10 million, roughly $350 million today, enough to live in absurd luxury forever without working. His older brothers built accordingly. Cornelius Vanderbilt II built the Breakers in Newport, 70 rooms, modeled after an Italian Renaissance palace, completed 1895, cost $7 million, $250 million today. Purpose: summer entertaining. William K. Vanderbilt built Marble House in Newport, 50 rooms, modeled after the Petit Trianon at Versailles, completed 1892. Cost $11 million, $340 million today. Gift to his wife, Alva, who promptly divorced him. Frederick Vanderbilt built a mansion in Hyde Park, New York, 54 rooms, Beaux Art style, completed 1899, cost $660,000, $23 million today, used occasionally. All of these were display palaces, built to impress, seasonal residences, no productive purpose, pure consumption. But George Vanderbilt II looked at this pattern and chose differently. In 1888, George visited Asheville, North Carolina with his mother. The town sat in a valley ringed by the Blue Ridge Mountains. The air was clean, cool in summer, mild in winter. The scenery was dramatic. George was captivated, but not because he wanted a summer cottage. He wanted a working estate, self-sufficient, productive, scientific. He began buying land, not hundreds of acres, thousands. By 1895, George owned approximately 125,000 acres, nearly 200 square miles, making it one of the largest private land holdings in America. The plan was ambitious.
Build a house. Grand, yes, but also a year-round residence, not a seasonal showpiece. Establish scientific forestry. Manage the forests sustainably, producing timber revenue. Create productive farms, dairy, vegetables, livestock to support the estate. Make the estate self-sustaining or as close as possible. This was radical. Other Vanderbilts built houses. George was building an enterprise. Other Vanderbilts hired society architects. George hired Richard Morris Hunt, America's greatest architect, and Frederick Law Olmsted, the landscape architect who designed Central Park. But George gave them different instructions. Not build me the grandest house in America, but build me a house that fits this landscape. Make it beautiful, yes, but make it functional. Make it last. Construction began in 1889. It would take 6 years, and from the very beginning, Biltmore was different. While George built Biltmore, his brothers were building too. The contrast is instructive. The Breakers. Cornelius Vanderbilt II, Newport, 1893 to 1895. Purpose: summer house, used approximately 10 weeks per year. Design: Richard Morris Hunt, modeled after 16th century Genoese palaces. Limestone facade, marble everywhere, gold leaf, crystal. 70 rooms, most unused even when family was in residence. Revenue generation: none. Pure expense. Maintenance staff: approximately 40 full-time servants even in off-season. Cost to operate: estimated $200,000 annually, roughly $7 million today. Income from the property: zero. The Breakers was magnificent, a 70-foot-high great hall, bathrooms with hot and cold fresh water and salt water pumped from the ocean, platinum leaf on the ceiling of the dining room. But it was economically suicidal. The house generated zero income, it cost a fortune to maintain, and it was used less than 3 months per year. Biltmore. George Vanderbilt, Asheville, 1889 to 1895. Purpose: year-round primary residence and working estate. Design: Richard Morris Hunt, French Renaissance chateau, but designed with modern systems, central heating, electricity, indoor plumbing throughout, built to be lived in, not just displayed. Revenue generation: forestry, dairy, farms, orchards, designed from the start to produce income. Maintenance staff: approximately 80 to 100, but many worked productive operations, farming, forestry, that generated revenue. Cost to operate: high, yes, estimated $250,000 annually, but offset partially by estate production. Income from property: timber sales, dairy products, crops. Not enough to cover all costs, but substantial. Biltmore was also magnificent, 250 rooms, banquet hall with a 70-foot ceiling, 10,000-book library, but it was designed to function as well as impress. The difference in philosophy: the Breakers,
build the most impressive summer house possible. Biltmore, build an estate that can sustain itself and serve as a model for scientific land management. One was a monument, one was an enterprise. That difference would determine which survived. By 1900, America's wealthy had built over 300 palatial estates. Newport alone had approximately 40 cottages, each with 30 to 100 rooms. Fifth Avenue in New York was lined with mansions, the Astors, Carnegies, Fricks, Morgans, Vanderbilts. San Francisco had Nob Hill, Chicago had Prairie Avenue, Philadelphia had the Main Line. The pattern was universal: build big, entertain lavishly, display wealth, compete for social supremacy. And for a brief moment, roughly 1890 to 1914, it seemed sustainable. The economy was booming, industrial profits were staggering, there was no federal income tax, inheritance taxes were minimal, labor was cheap. If you had $10 million in 1900 invested conservatively at 5%, you earned $500,000 annually, enough to maintain a 50-room mansion, a staff of 40, and a lavish lifestyle with money left over. But cracks were forming. The social critique. By 1900, progressive reformers were attacking Gilded Age excess. Jacob Riis published How the Other Half Lives, 1890, documenting tenement poverty in New York. Upton Sinclair published The Jungle, 1906, exposing meatpacking industry horrors. Ida Tarbell published her expose of Standard Oil, 1904, attacking Rockefeller's monopoly. The reformers asked a question the wealthy didn't want to answer. How can one family own a 70-room cottage while workers live in squalor? The economic pressure. Maintaining these estates was expensive and getting more expensive. Servants' wages were rising as alternative employment, factories, offices became available. Property taxes were increasing as cities and states sought revenue. And the estates generated no income. They were pure consumption. Most owners didn't care. They had so much money that even profligate spending couldn't exhaust it in one generation. But they weren't thinking about the next generation, or the generation after that, or what would happen when the economy changed, or when taxes changed, or when their children inherited the house but not enough money to maintain it. George Vanderbilt was thinking about these things. At Biltmore, he was building something designed to last. George Vanderbilt was not a businessman. He was a scholar, quiet, intellectual, more comfortable with books than people. But he understood something his brothers didn't. Sustainable systems outlast unsustainable displays. The forestry program. In 1891, before Biltmore House was even finished, George hired Gifford Pinchot, a young American who had studied forestry in Europe, to manage Biltmore's forests. This was revolutionary. Forestry as a profession barely existed in America. Forests were either logged destructively or left untouched. Pinchot introduced scientific forestry. Survey the land, identify tree species, mark mature trees for selective harvest, replant cleared areas with native species, thin overcrowded stands to improve growth, control erosion through terracing and ground cover, prevent fires through controlled burns and fire breaks. The goal? Manage the forest so it produces timber revenue continuously without depleting the resource. Pinchot left Biltmore in 1895 to work for the federal government. He would become the first chief of the U.S. Forest Service. George replaced him with Carl Schenck, a German-trained forester. Schenck went further. In 1898, he founded the Biltmore Forest School, the first forestry school in America. Students lived on the estate. They learned by doing, marking timber, calculating volumes, building roads, managing controlled burns.
The school trained hundreds of foresters who spread scientific forestry across America. And the forest produced income: timber sales, seedling sales, consulting fees. Not enough to cover all of Biltmore's costs, but substantial and sustainable. The forest wasn't being depleted, it was being managed for perpetual yield. The dairy and farms. George established a Jersey cattle dairy, one of the largest in the Southeast. The herd grazed on estate pastures. Milk, butter, and cheese were produced on site. Some sold locally, some supplied the estate. All contributed revenue. Vegetable gardens and orchards supplied the house and sold surplus. Hogs and chickens provided meat and eggs. Again, not enough to make Biltmore self-sufficient, but it reduced expenses and generated income. The village. George built Biltmore Village, a planned community for estate workers, English cottage-style homes, a church, a school, a hospital. Workers were paid fair wages, housing was provided, medical care was available. This wasn't pure altruism. George understood well-treated workers are productive workers. But it also created community stability. Workers stayed, skills accumulated, the estate functioned smoothly. The difference. By 1900, Biltmore was a residence. George and Edith lived there year-round after marrying in 1898. A working estate, forestry, dairy, farms generating revenue. A scientific experiment, Biltmore Forest School training the next generation. A community, Biltmore Village providing jobs and stability. Meanwhile, the breakers was a summer house, used 10 weeks per year, an expense, generating zero revenue, a display, purpose was to impress, empty most of the time, staff maintained it for absent owners. One was built to endure, one was built to impress. Endurance wins, always. But first, a crisis would test which model was stronger. March 6, 1914, George Vanderbilt dies in Washington, D.C., following complications from appendicitis. He is 51 years old. His wife, Edith Vanderbilt, is 43. Their daughter, Cornelia, is 14. George's will leaves everything to Edith for her lifetime, then to Cornelia. Everything includes Biltmore House, 250 rooms, 125,000 acres of land, the forestry operations, the dairy and farms, Biltmore Village, an art collection, investments. And also, annual operating costs of approximately $250,000, a staff of 80 to 100 to pay, property taxes, maintenance, constant in a structure this size, the responsibility to preserve George's vision. Edith sits in the library at Biltmore, the room George loved most, and reviews the finances. The numbers are sobering. George's investments yield approximately $200,000 annually. Operating costs are approximately $250,000 annually. Deficit, $50,000 per year. And that's before accounting for the new federal income tax enacted in 1913, the year before George died. Previously, wealthy Americans paid minimal taxes. Now, top earners pay up to 7% federal income tax on earnings over $500,000. The tax will only increase. By 1918, the top rate will hit 77%. By 1944, 94%. Edith does the math. At the current rate, the estate will exhaust its capital in approximately 15 to 20 years. Then, forced sale, bankruptcy, the estate auctioned, broken up, lost, unless she changes something. Other wealthy widows faced with similar situations had three options: liquidate everything, sell the estate, live comfortably on proceeds, cut costs drastically, close parts of the house, fire staff, live minimally, remarry wealth, find another rich man to fund the lifestyle. Edith chooses none of these. She chooses a fourth option, one so radical that it will seem impossible:
Make the estate pay for itself, not partially, not eventually, now, immediately, whatever it takes. And in 1915, Edith makes the first decision that will save Biltmore and doom every other estate that doesn't follow her example. Edith identifies the problem clearly. The land is too expensive to maintain, and it generates insufficient revenue. 125,000 acres require foresters to manage timber, rangers to prevent fires, maintenance of roads and trails, property taxes on the entire acreage. The forestry program produces revenue, yes, but not nearly enough to justify the cost of maintaining such vast acreage. Edith makes a brutal calculation. The house and immediate grounds, approximately 8,000 acres, are the irreplaceable core. The forest, while important, is negotiable. She approaches the United States Forest Service, the agency Gifford Pinchot now leads, with a proposal: sell approximately 87,000 acres to the federal government to create a national forest. The reaction from Biltmore staff and Asheville community is shock. Sell George's forest, the forest he loved, the scientific forestry experiment, the Biltmore Forest School? Edith is firm. The choice is keep all the land and lose everything in 10 to 15 years, sell most of the land and save the house. She chooses survival. Negotiations take time. Surveyors mark boundaries, appraisers set values, Congress appropriates funds. The sale closes in 1916. 86,700 acres transfer to federal ownership for approximately $5 per acre, total $433,500.
Less than George spent acquiring and improving the land, but enough to retire immediate debts, build a financial cushion, fund operations for several years, buy time to develop other revenue sources. The sold land becomes Pisgah National Forest, named for Mount Pisgah, visible from Biltmore's terraces. George's forestry principles, selective cutting, sustainable management, scientific methods, are preserved under federal care. The Biltmore Forest School closes in 1913, but the forest itself continues as a living laboratory, now public rather than private. Edith retains approximately 8,000 acres around the house, still a substantial estate, but manageable. The decision is painful. George built Biltmore as a unified vision: house, forest, farms working together. Edith has broken that vision to save part of it. But here's what she understands and what the owners of the Breakers, Marble House, and every other Gilded Age estate refuse to understand. A monument to the past cannot survive unchanged. It must adapt or die. Edith has chosen adaptation. The others will choose pride, and pride will kill them. 1920s. The other estates struggle and refuse to adapt. The 1920s, the Roaring Twenties, are economically prosperous for many Americans, but for Gilded Age estates, the 1920s are a slow-motion crisis. The Breakers, Cornelius Vanderbilt II's widow, Alice. Cornelius died in 1999. His widow, Alice, inherited the Breakers. By the 1920s, Alice is in her 70s. She still summers at the Breakers, maintaining the full staff, hosting occasional gatherings. But the economics are devastating. Annual operating costs, approximately $200,000 adjusted for 1920s inflation. Revenue from property? Zero. Alice's income? Sufficient to cover costs, but barely, and diminishing as taxes rise. The Breakers generates no income. It is pure expense. The obvious solution: open it to tours, charge admission, generate revenue. But Alice refuses. The Breakers is a private home. Opening it to tourists would be humiliating. What would people say? Pride over pragmatism. She chooses to struggle in private rather than adapt in public. Marble House, Alva Vanderbilt Belmont.
Alva divorced William Vanderbilt in 1995, keeping Marble House. She remarried Oliver Belmont, who died in 1908, leaving her wealthy. By the 1920s, Alva is a suffragette using Marble House for political meetings. She maintains the full estate, staff, and grounds. But when Alva dies in 1933, her heirs face the same problem Alice Vanderbilt faces. Marble House costs a fortune to maintain and generates zero income. The heirs try to sell it, no buyers. Who can afford to buy and then maintain a 50-room palace? Eventually, they'll donate it to the Preservation Society of Newport County, but not yet, not until they've exhausted every other option. Pride delays the inevitable.
Hearst Castle, William Randolph Hearst. We've already documented Hearst Castle's story. By the 1920s, Hearst is spending approximately $1 million annually on construction and operations. His newspapers generate income, yes, but not enough to cover his spending. By 1937, the money will run out. Construction will stop. Hearst will abandon the castle, all because he refuses to do what Edith did: stop building, cut costs, adapt. Whitemarsh Hall. Edward Stotesbury, a banking partner of J.P. Morgan, built Whitemarsh Hall outside Philadelphia, completed 1921. 147 rooms, modeled after an English country estate, cost $10 million. Annual operating costs estimated $300,000. Revenue? Zero. Stotesbury dies in 1938. His widow tries to maintain it. Impossible. She tries to sell it. No buyers. In 1948, Whitemarsh Hall is demolished, 27 years after completion. One of America's grandest estates reduced to rubble because no one could afford to keep it. The pattern. Across America, the same story repeats. Wealthy industrialist builds palatial estate. Estate costs a fortune to maintain. Estate generates zero income. Owner dies. Heirs cannot afford maintenance. Heirs refuse to adapt. Open to public, convert to productive use. Estate is sold, donated, or demolished. Pride kills every time. But Biltmore is different, because Edith understands what the others refuse to accept. Survival requires humility. October 1929, the stock market crashes. The Great Depression begins. Within months, stock values collapse 50 to 90%. Banks fail, dividends stop, investment income evaporates. For Gilded Age estates dependent on investment income to cover operating costs, this is catastrophic. The breakers. Alice Vanderbilt's investment income, previously sufficient to cover the breakers' operating costs, collapses. She cuts staff, closes sections of the house, reduces entertaining, but she still refuses to open the breakers to the public. That would be admitting defeat. She struggles on, spending down capital to maintain appearances. Marble House. Edward Stotesbury dies in 1933. Her estate is smaller than expected. The Depression has reduced asset values. Her heirs inherit Marble House and immediately realize, we cannot afford this. Annual costs exceed $100,000. Revenue? Zero. They close the house, fire the staff, try to sell it. No buyers. Marble House sits empty, slowly deteriorating. Across America, the Depression forces a reckoning. Dozens of estates are abandoned. Owners walk away, unable to afford upkeep. Donated to universities, preservation societies, anyone who will take them. Demolished, sold for scrap value, land redeveloped. Fifth Avenue mansions in New York are particularly vulnerable. Urban land is valuable. The mansions are expensive to maintain.
Between 1925 and 1950, nearly every Gilded Age mansion on Fifth Avenue is demolished and replaced with apartment buildings or commercial structures. The Vanderbilt mansions, the Astor mansions, all gone. Only a handful survive, converted to museums or institutional use. The era of private palaces is ending, except at Biltmore, because in 1930, Edith Vanderbilt makes the second decision that saves Biltmore. Edith reviews the finances in early 1930. The Depression has devastated her investment income. Estate operations still cost approximately $250,000 annually. Revenue from forestry and farms, approximately $80,000 annually. Deficit, $170,000 per year. At this rate, the estate will be bankrupt within 5 years. Edith faces the same choice every other estate owner faces: close Biltmore, fire staff, walk away, donate it to the government or a foundation, find another source of revenue. Edith chooses the third option. But where will the revenue come from? The answer is obvious and humiliating. Open Biltmore to paying visitors. For Edith's social class, this is nearly unthinkable. Your private home open to strangers? People walking through your bedrooms, touching your furniture, gawking at your possessions. It would be a public admission: we need money. We cannot afford this. Every other estate owner refuses this option. Pride will not allow it. But Edith is pragmatic. She loves Biltmore. She wants to preserve George's vision. But she also understands better to share Biltmore with the public than lose it entirely. In early 1930, Edith announces that Biltmore Estate will open for public tours starting March 15, 1930. Admission, $2 per person, approximately $35 today. The reaction from Asheville and the region is enthusiastic. The reaction from Edith's social peers is horror. How could she? Opening her home like a museum? Charging admission? But Edith doesn't care about their opinions. She cares about survival. March 15, 1930, opening day. Over 1,000 visitors come to tour Biltmore. They drive up the approach road through Olmsted's restored forests. They step out of their cars and see the house, George Vanderbilt's French Renaissance chateau, rising against the Blue Ridge Mountains. They enter the house. They walk through the entrance hall, the banquet hall, the library, the winter garden. They see George's 10,000-volume book collection. They see the Flemish tapestries. They see the carved stone and oak. And they pay $2 each. 1,000 visitors times $2 equals $2,000 on opening day. Over the next year, approximately 40,000 visitors tour Biltmore. Revenue, $80,000. Not enough to cover all operating costs, but substantial and growing. More importantly, Edith has proven the model works. Biltmore can generate revenue by opening to the public, and she is the first major Gilded Age estate to do this voluntarily. Others will eventually follow: the Breakers in 1948, Marble House in 1963, but Edith is first in 1930, before the others are forced to. That timing will make all the difference. Through the 1930s, Biltmore continues refining its public operations. Tours are expanded, more rooms open to visitors, guides are trained to explain history, architecture, art. Tours are scheduled efficiently to maximize visitor flow. Visitor amenities are added: a gift shop selling postcards, books, local crafts, a tea room serving lunch, generating additional revenue, improved parking and restrooms. Marketing increases: advertisements in regional newspapers, brochures distributed to hotels and tourist bureaus, partnerships with railroads to promote tourism. Annual visitors grow.
1930, around 40,000. 1935, around 60,000. 1940, around 80,000. Revenue grows proportionally. By 1940, tourism revenue covers approximately 40% of operating costs, still not self-sufficient, but moving in the right direction. Meanwhile, the breakers. Alice Vanderbilt dies in 1934. Her daughter Gladys inherits. Gladys tries to maintain the breakers, but her income, reduced by the Depression, is insufficient. She cuts staff to a skeleton crew, closes most of the house, uses only a few rooms. The breakers is too large for one family, too expensive to maintain, too grand for changed circumstances. But Gladys still refuses to open it to the public. Pride over survival. Marble House sits empty through the 1930s. The heirs cannot sell it, cannot afford to maintain it. In 1932, they donate it to the Preservation Society of Newport County. The Preservation Society opens it to tours in 1963, 33 years after Biltmore opened. White Marsh Hall. Edward Stotesbury's widow tries desperately to keep it. She cannot. In 1943, she sells it to the Pennsylvania Salt Manufacturing Company for $151,000, a fraction of the $10 million it cost to build. The company uses it briefly, then abandons it. In 1948, White Marsh Hall is demolished. The pattern continues. Estate after estate collapses. Linwood Hall, Widener Estate in Philadelphia, family moves out in the 1940s, house abandoned. Florham, Vanderbilt Twombly Estate in New Jersey, sold to Fairleigh Dickinson University, 1958. Rough Point, Duke Estate in Newport becomes museum after Doris Duke's death, 1993. Rosecliff, Ulrich's Estate in Newport, donated to the Preservation Society, 1971. All of them refused to adapt when they still had options. All of them lost control when forced to. Biltmore adapted early, voluntarily, pragmatically. That choice saved it. In 1942, the United States is at war. The National Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C. faces a problem. Its collection, paintings, sculptures, documents worth millions, is vulnerable to bombing or sabotage. The gallery needs a secure location, far from the coast, to store its most valuable pieces. The requirements: inland location, stable climate, secure facility, large rooms, trustworthy management. Biltmore meets every requirement. The National Gallery approaches Edith. Will she allow Biltmore to store art during the war? Edith agrees. The gallery will pay rent, and the partnership validates Biltmore's importance. Starting in 1942, crates arrive at Biltmore. The contents: 62 paintings and 17 sculptures, including works by Rembrandt, Raphael, Van Dyck, and Gilbert Stuart's iconic portrait of George Washington. The pieces are stored in the music room and several other secure spaces on the first floor. Armed guards patrol, climate is monitored, the art is safe. Tourists continue visiting Biltmore during the war, though numbers drop due to gas rationing. But the gallery's rental payments help cover costs, and when the war ends in 1945, the art returns to Washington unharmed. The National Gallery publicly thanks Biltmore. The story makes national news. Biltmore is not just a tourist attraction, it is a national treasure, trusted to protect America's cultural heritage. This validation matters. It reinforces Biltmore's legitimacy. It proves that opening to the public was not surrender, it was service. Edith was right. Adaptation saved Biltmore, and in return, Biltmore served the nation. Edith Vanderbilt dies on December 21, 1958, at age 87 in Providence, Rhode Island. She guided Biltmore for 44 years after George's death. She made the decisions that saved it, selling the forest, opening to tourists, adapting constantly.
Ownership passes to her daughter, Cornelia Vanderbilt Cecil. She married John Cecil in 1924. But Cornelia and John do not live at Biltmore full-time. They have homes elsewhere. The estate now passes to their sons, George Henry Vanderbilt Cecil and William Amherst Vanderbilt Cecil. William, or Bill Cecil, takes primary operational control in 1960. He is 35 years old. Bill faces the same question Edith faced in 1914. How do we make Biltmore sustainable for another generation? Tourism revenue has grown, but operating costs have grown faster. Annual visitors, late 1950s, 100,000. Annual revenue from tourism, around $300,000. Annual operating costs, around $500,000. Still a deficit. Bill realizes tourism alone will never be enough. We need to diversify. In the 1960s and 1970s, Bill transforms Biltmore from a house museum into a multifaceted business. 1971, the winery. Bill establishes Biltmore Estate Wine Company, the first winery on the estate, though George Vanderbilt had grown grapes experimentally. The winery produces wine from estate grapes and grapes sourced from California. It opens a tasting room for visitors. Revenue source, wine sales plus tasting fees. 1979, Christmas at Biltmore. Bill introduces special holiday events, Christmas decorations, candlelight tours, seasonal programming. This extends the tourism season. Biltmore is no longer just a summer destination. Revenue increases significantly during the holidays. 2001, the Inn on Biltmore Estate. Bill's sons, the fourth generation, open a luxury hotel on the estate grounds. The inn has 213 rooms, a spa, a restaurant. Revenue source, room bookings, dining, events. Ongoing, expanded amenities, gift shops expanded, multiple restaurants on property, outdoor activities, hiking, biking, river sports, weddings, and private events. By the early 2000s, Biltmore is a historic house museum, a winery, a hotel and resort, an event venue, a working farm, still maintaining George's original vision. Annual visitors, over 1 million. Annual revenue, over $100 million, estimated. Operating costs, still high, but covered by revenue. Biltmore is fully self-sustaining. While Biltmore thrived, every other major Gilded Age estate fell. The breakers. Alice Vanderbilt died in 1934. Her daughter Gladys struggled to maintain it. In 1948, Gladys leased the breakers to the Preservation Society of Newport County for $1 per year. The Preservation Society opened it to paid tours. Gladys retained a private apartment, but most of the house became a museum. In 1972, her daughter donated the breakers to the Preservation Society outright. The Vanderbilt family lost ownership. Timeline: opened to public 1948, 18 years after Biltmore. Marble House. Alva Belmont died in 1933. Heirs donated it to the Preservation Society in 1932. Opened to public 1963, 33 years after Biltmore. The Vanderbilt family lost ownership immediately. Hearst Castle. Hearst abandoned it in 1947, died 1951. Hearst Corporation donated it to California State Parks in 1958. Opened to public 1958, 28 years after Biltmore. The Hearst family lost ownership. White Marsh Hall. Sold 1943, demolished 1948. Total loss. Linwood Hall. Abandoned 1952, sits vacant and decaying today. Multiple attempts to sell or redevelop have failed, functionally lost. Florham, sold to Fairleigh Dickinson University 1958. The Vanderbilt Twombly family lost ownership. Rough Point, Doris Duke lived there until her death in 1993, became a museum. The Duke family lost ownership. The pattern? Every other major Gilded Age estate either donated or sold to institutions, lost family ownership, demolished, total loss, abandoned, functional loss. Only Biltmore remains in the original family's ownership. Why? Because Edith Vanderbilt made the hard choices early. She sold the forest in 1916, painful but necessary. She opened to the public in 1930, humiliating but necessary. She adapted constantly, difficult but necessary. The others waited. They clung to pride. They refused to adapt, and they lost everything.
When William A.V. Cecil, known as Bill, takes operational control of Biltmore in 1960, he faces a stark reality. Biltmore is a historic treasure, and it is bleeding money. Tourism revenue has grown steadily since 1930, but it is not enough. Annual visitors, 1960, approximately 120,000. Annual tourism revenue, approximately $400,000. Annual operating costs, approximately $700,000. Annual deficit, approximately $300,000. The deficit is covered by selling assets, land parcels, timber, investments, but this is unsustainable. Eventually, the assets run out. Bill understands what his grandmother Edith understood. Adaptation is not optional, it is survival. But Bill goes further than Edith. Edith opened Biltmore to tourists. Bill will transform Biltmore into a comprehensive business enterprise. His philosophy is radical for 1960. Biltmore is not a museum that happens to make money. It is a business whose product is heritage. This distinction matters. Museums are subsidized by donations, grants, and endowments. They prioritize preservation over profit. Businesses must generate profit to survive. They prioritize customer experience and revenue. Bill decides Biltmore must be the latter while appearing to be the former. Visitors should experience Biltmore as a historic estate, authentic, reverent, educational. But the operations must be ruthlessly commercial, maximizing revenue, controlling costs, investing in growth. This is a tightrope walk, and Bill will spend the next 40 years perfecting the balance. Bill's first major innovation, Biltmore Estate Winery, opened in 1971. The decision is strategic and symbolic. Strategic, wine tourism is growing in America. California's Napa Valley is becoming a destination. East Coast wineries are rare but viable. Symbolic, George Vanderbilt had experimented with grape growing in the 1890s. Reviving the winery honors his vision while creating modern revenue. Bill hires a French winemaker. He plants vineyards on estate land, both French varietals, Chardonnay, Cabernet, and native muscadine grapes suited to North Carolina's climate. The winery opens in the estate's former dairy building, a beautiful brick structure with vaulted ceilings, perfectly suited for wine production and tastings. The business model? Produce wine on site, estate-grown and sourced grapes, offer tastings to Biltmore visitors, $5 to $10 per person, sell bottles in the winery shop and gift shops, distribute wine regionally to restaurants and retailers. Results? Within 5 years, the winery is generating $500,000 plus annually in revenue. More importantly, it extends visitor stays. Previously, tourists toured the house, 2 hours, and left. Now they tour the house and visit the winery, add 1 to 2 hours. Longer visits mean more spending, lunch, gifts, wine purchases. By 1980, the winery is one of the most visited in America, not because the wine is the best, though it wins awards, but because it is attached to Biltmore. The lesson Bill learns? Diversification multiplies revenue from the same visitor base. Biltmore has always been seasonal. Peak season, spring and summer, March to August. Shoulder season, fall, September to November. Dead season, winter, December to February. This creates problems. Staff must be hired seasonally, inefficient. Revenue concentrates in 6 to 7 months. Winter operating costs, heating a 4-acre building, are high with minimal revenue. Bill studies the problem and realizes we need to create a winter attraction. In 1979, Biltmore launches Christmas at Biltmore, a seasonal event that will transform the business. The concept? Decorate the entire house for Christmas. 70+ Christmas trees, miles of garland, thousands of ornaments. Offer evening candlelight tours. Serve special holiday meals in the estate restaurants. Create a magical, immersive experience. The marketing pitch: experience a Gilded Age Christmas at America's largest home. The first year is experimental, modest decorations, limited evening hours. Results: visitors love it. December attendance doubles compared to previous years. Bill expands. By the mid-1980s, Christmas at Biltmore is a major regional attraction. Elaborate decorations in every room, professionally designed, themed. Extended evening hours, house lit dramatically at night. Holiday concerts and events, special dining experiences. By 1990, December becomes Biltmore's second highest revenue month, behind only July. The impact? Year-round employment becomes viable. Staff needed November to January for setup, event operations, and teardown. Winter operating costs are covered by December revenue. Annual revenue increases by 30 to 40%. The broader lesson: seasonal businesses die unless they solve seasonality. Biltmore solved it with Christmas. Through the 1980s and 1990s, Bill continues refining and expanding Biltmore's operations. Restaurants. Multiple dining options open. The dining room, upscale, reservations required. The bistro, casual, wine-focused. The stable cafe, quick service, families. Each targets different customer segments and price points. Revenue from food service, $5 million annually by 1990. Retail expansion. Gift shops multiply and specialize. The estate shop, books, postcards, Biltmore branded items. The Christmas shop, ornaments, decorations, holiday items. The wine shop, wine and accessories. The conservatory shop, garden items, plants, seeds. Revenue from retail, $10 million annually by 1995. Event hosting. Biltmore begins hosting private events, weddings on estate grounds, not in the house itself, corporate retreats, galas, and fundraisers. Event revenue, $3 million annually by 2000. Marketing sophistication. Bill hires professional marketers. Biltmore develops regional advertising campaigns, TV, radio, print, direct mail to past visitors, travel agent partnerships, tour bus partnerships, AAA and senior organization partnerships. Annual visitors grow steadily. 1980, 250,000. 1990, 600,000. 2000, 900,000. Financial turnaround. By the mid-1990s, Biltmore is fully self-sustaining for the first time in its history. Annual revenue, $50 million. Annual operating costs, $45 million. Annual profit, $5 million. The profit is reinvested. Maintenance, restoration, improvements, expansion. Biltmore no longer needs to sell assets to survive. It generates surplus. This is the transformation Edith started in 1930. Bill has completed it by 1995, but one more major expansion remains. In 2001, Bill's sons, Bill Cecil Jr. and Deanie Pickering, fourth generation, opened the Inn on Biltmore Estate. This is the most expensive and ambitious project since the house itself was built. The Inn, 213 luxury hotel rooms, full-service spa, fine dining restaurant, conference and event facilities.
located on estate grounds not in the historic house. Cost, estimated $20 million plus, financed through debt and reinvested profits. The strategy? Previously, visitors came to Biltmore for a day trip, 3 to 5 hours, then leave. The inn creates multi-day visitors. Day 1, tour the house, visit the winery, check into the inn. Day 2, spa, grounds activities, fine dining. Day 3, shopping, final tour, depart. Multi-day visitors spend 3 to 5 times more than day visitors. Results? The inn operates at 85% plus occupancy year-round, one of the highest in the region. Room rates? $300 to $800 plus per night, high-end pricing justified by location and exclusivity. Annual inn revenue, $30 million plus estimated. The inn also attracts a different customer, affluent travelers, not just regional tourists, weddings and events, couples book entire weekends, corporate retreats, high-margin business. By 2005, the inn is the single largest revenue generator on the estate. By the early 2000s, Biltmore is no longer just a historic house museum. It is a multifaceted hospitality and tourism business that happens to include a historic house. Revenue streams, estimated 2020s, admissions, house tours, $40 million. The inn, hotel, spa, dining, $35 million. Food and beverage, restaurants, cafes, $15 million. Retail, shops, $12 million. Winery, tastings, sales, $10 million. Events, weddings, corporate, $8 million. Total annual revenue, $120 million plus estimated. Biltmore is private and does not publish financials. Annual visitors, 1.0 to 1.4 million, varies by year. COVID-19 impacted 2020 to 2021. Employees, 2,000 plus, full-time and seasonal. Operating costs, $100 million plus, maintenance, staff, utilities, marketing. Annual profit, $10 to $20 million plus, estimated, reinvested in property. What Biltmore is today? A historic house museum, the core attraction, a luxury resort, the inn, a winery, top attraction in NC, a wedding and event venue, a restaurant group with multiple dining venues, a retail operation, branded merchandise, a working farm, still maintaining George's original vision, vegetable gardens, livestock, sustainable practices. And it is still family-owned. The Cecil family, George Vanderbilt's descendants, retains ownership and operational control. This is unique among Gilded Age estates. Every other major estate is either donated to preservation societies, sold to institutions, government-owned, demolished. Biltmore alone remains private. To fully understand why Biltmore survived, we must understand in detail why the others fell. Case Study 1. The Breakers. Pride, Delayed Adaptation. Built 1893 to 1895, Cornelius Vanderbilt II, Newport, Rhode Island. Cost $7 million, $250 million today. Purpose, summer house, used 8 to 10 weeks per year. The economic model. Annual operating costs, 1920s, around $200,000. Annual revenue, 0. Private residence, no productive use. Funding source, Cornelius Vanderbilt II's investment income. The problem. Cornelius died in 1999. His widow, Alice, inherited the Breakers. Her investment income was sufficient until the Great Depression. After 1929, her income collapsed, but operating costs remained. The solution? Obvious. Open the Breakers to paid tours like Biltmore did in 1930. Alice's response? No, the Breakers is a private home. Opening it to tourists would be humiliating. The timeline of decline, 1930 to 1934, Alice struggles privately, cutting staff, closing rooms, selling assets. 1934, Alice dies. Daughter Gladys inherits. 1935 to 1947, Gladys tries to maintain the breakers, cannot afford it, still refuses to open to public. 1948, Gladys, financially desperate, leases the breakers to the Preservation Society of Newport County for $1 per year. The Preservation Society opens it to paid tours. Revenue finally flows. But Gladys has lost control. The house is no longer truly private. 1972, Gladys's daughter, Countess Sappery, donates the breakers to the Preservation Society outright. The Vanderbilt family loses ownership completely. Why the breakers fell? Pride. Alice and Gladys refused to adapt when they had options, 1930s to 1940s. By the time they accepted adaptation in 1948, they had no leverage. They had to surrender control. Contrast to Biltmore, Edith adapted in 1930, voluntarily, while she still had options. She retained control. The estate remained family-owned. The breakers waited too long, lost everything. Lesson: pride costs more than humility. Case Study 2. Marble House, Immediate Surrender. Built 1888 to 1892, William K. Vanderbilt, gift to wife, Alva. Cost $11 million, $340 million today. Purpose: summer house, statement of wealth. The economic model: even worse than the breakers. Annual operating costs around $150,000. Annual revenue, zero. Funding source: William's wealth until 1895 divorce, then Alva's wealth from second marriage to Oliver Belmont. The problem: Alva Vanderbilt Belmont was independently wealthy after 2 marriages. She could afford Marble House, but she died in 1933. Her heirs inherited Marble House and immediately realized they could not afford it. The timeline: 1933, Alva dies. 1932, actually before her death in anticipation, heirs begin negotiating with the Preservation Society of Newport County. 1932, Marble House is donated to the Preservation Society. 1963, the Preservation Society opens Marble House to paid tours. 31 years after receiving it, they couldn't afford to open it earlier. Why Marble House fell? No one fought for it. The heirs immediately gave up. No attempt to adapt, no attempt to generate revenue. Instant surrender. Contrast to Biltmore. Edith fought. She sold land, opened to public, adapted constantly. She chose struggle over surrender. Marble House, immediate surrender. Lesson: heritage requires commitment. Without it, even the grandest house is just an expensive burden. Case Study 3. White Marsh Hall, demolished. Built 1916 to 1921, Edward T. Stotesbury, near Philadelphia. Cost $10 million, $180 million today. Size: 147 rooms, 100,000 plus square feet. Purpose: primary residence and entertaining. The economic model: annual operating costs approximately $300,000. Annual revenue, $0. Funding source: Stotesbury's banking fortune, partner in J.P. Morgan & Co. The problem: Stotesbury died in 1938. His widow, Eva, inherited White Marsh Hall. Her income was insufficient to maintain it. The timeline of destruction: 1938 to 1943, Eva struggles to maintain the house, cuts staff, tries to sell, no buyers. 1943, Eva sells White Marsh Hall to Pennsylvania Salt Manufacturing Company for $151,000, less than 2% of construction cost. 1943 to 1948, the company tries to use it as offices and labs. Impractical, too large, too expensive. Abandon it. 1948, the company demolishes White Marsh Hall. Total lifespan, 27 years. Why it was demolished? Location. Suburban Philadelphia land was valuable. The house was worthless, but the land was worth millions for development. Size. 147 rooms was too large for any adaptive reuse, too big for a school, museum, hotel in that era. No one fought for it. No preservation society, no government interest, no adaptive reuse plan. Contrast with Biltmore. Location, remote North Carolina. Land is beautiful, but not high-value urban real estate. Demolition makes no economic sense. Size, 250 rooms is also huge, but Biltmore adapted. Tourism, hotel, events can absorb the space. Fight. The Cecil family fought to preserve it. Whitemarsh Hall? No one fought. Demolished. Lesson: location matters, but so does commitment. Case Study 4. Linwood Hall, abandoned and rotting. Built 1897 to 1900, Peter A.B. Widener, Elkins Park, Pennsylvania. Cost $8 million, $280 million today. Size: 110 rooms, 70,000 square feet. Purpose: primary residence and art museum. Widener had one of America's greatest art collections. The economic model. Annual operating costs approximately $250,000 plus. Annual revenue $0. Funding source: Widener's fortune, streetcar and utilities magnate. The tragedy. Peter Widener died in 1915. His son George inherited. George died on the Titanic in 1912, before his father. George's son, Peter A.B. Widener II, eventually inherited. The family donated the entire art collection to the National Gallery of Art, one of the founding collections, but they kept the house. The timeline of decay. 1940s, family moves out. House sits empty. 1950s to 1990s, various owners try to use it. School, event venue, all fail. 2000s to present. House is abandoned. No heat, no maintenance, roof leaks, interior destroyed by water damage, vandalism, decay. Multiple attempted sales. No viable buyers. Today, Linwood Hall is one of America's largest abandoned mansions. Preservation groups call it savable, but unfunded. It continues to rot. Why Linwood Hall failed? Timing. By the time the family gave up, 1940s, adaptive reuse was not yet common. No one knew what to do with 110-room mansions. Location: suburban Philadelphia, not valuable enough to demolish, not attractive enough for tourism or hotel. No vision. Unlike Biltmore, which had Edith, then Bill with clear adaptive visions, Linwood had no champion. Contrast with Biltmore. Biltmore adapted early, 1930. By the time adaptive reuse became necessary, they had 20-plus years of experience. Linwood waited until 1940s. Too late. Lesson: early adaptation creates expertise. Late adaptation creates crisis. Case Study 5. Hearst Castle, donated to state. We've covered this extensively in the previous script. Summary: built 1919 to 1947, William Randolph Hearst, California. Cost $10 million, $500 million today. Why it failed? Hearst spent more than he earned, refused to stop construction, went bankrupt, and abandoned it. Timeline: abandoned 1947, donated to California 1958, opened to the public 1958. Current status: state-owned museum. Contrast with Biltmore. Hearst kept building. Edith stopped spending and started earning. Lesson: discipline saves, obsession destroys. One factor explains why nearly all Gilded Age estates fell between 1930 and 1980. Tax policy changed to make estate ownership economically impossible. Pre-1913, no federal income tax. Before 1913, there was no federal income tax. Wealthy Americans paid minimal taxes. If you had $10 million invested at 5%, you earned $500,000 annually, and you kept almost all of it. Maintaining a 50-room mansion costing $200,000 annually was easy. 1913, income tax begins. The 16th Amendment creates federal income tax. Initial rates are low, 1 to 7% on top earners, but rates rise quickly. 1918, top rate 77% World War I funding. 1944, top rate 94% World War II funding. 1950s to 1960s, top rate remains 90% plus. 1980s, Reagan cuts top rate to 50%, then 28%.
Impact on estate owners. If you earned $500,000 annually and faced a 90% tax rate, you kept $50,000. Your mansion costs $200,000 annually to maintain. You cannot afford it. Estate taxes, death taxes. 1916, federal estate tax created. 1940s to 1970s, top estate tax rate, 77%. Impact. When a wealthy estate owner dies, the heirs must pay 77% of the estate's value in taxes. Problem: most wealth is illiquid, real estate, art, businesses. Cash is insufficient to pay the tax. Solution: sell assets. Often this means selling the estate itself. But who can afford to buy a 50-room mansion in the 1940s to 1970s? Almost no one. Prices collapse, estates are donated or demolished. Property taxes. Local property taxes also increased dramatically, 1930s to 1970s, to fund New Deal and post-war programs. A 50-room mansion on 500 acres might face $50,000 plus annually in property taxes, 1960s dollars. Revenue? Zero if private residence. Unsustainable. 1. Early adaptation. Open to the public in 1930, generating revenue to pay property taxes. 2. Land sale. Edith sold 87,000 acres in 1916, reducing property tax burden. 3. Business structure. By the 1960s, Biltmore was structured as a business. Operating costs, including taxes, were business expenses offset by revenue. 4. Family commitment. Each generation chose to invest in Biltmore rather than liquidate. The others waited too long to adapt, couldn't generate revenue, held on to too much land, property taxes too high, remained private residences, no business deductions, heirs chose liquidation over commitment. Lesson: tax policy can kill industries. Biltmore survived by transforming from private residence to business before taxes became fatal. Biltmore survived, but survival was not free. The Cecil family, George Vanderbilt's descendants, paid a price for choosing preservation over liquidation. 1. Privacy. George built Biltmore as a private retreat. He was shy, intellectual, uncomfortable in crowds. Biltmore today hosts over 1 million visitors annually. The family still lives on the estate, not in Biltmore House but in private homes on the property, but they cannot escape the tourists. The estate is public now. Cost: the privacy George cherished is gone. 2. Exclusivity. The Vanderbilts were America's aristocracy. Biltmore was a symbol of that status. Opening to the public in 1930 was humiliating. It announced, "We need your money." Cost: the exclusivity and social status George's generation valued. 3. Control.
Biltmore today is a business. Business requires committees, managers, marketing departments, financial oversight, customer service standards. The family can't just live at Biltmore, they must manage a $120 million enterprise. Cost: the simplicity of private ownership. 4. Constant reinvestment.
Profits are reinvested. Maintenance, restoration, expansion. The family doesn't extract wealth from Biltmore, they pour money back in. Cost: potential liquidity. They could sell Biltmore for hundreds of millions, they choose not to. Number 5. Pressure to perform. Biltmore must remain profitable. If revenue declines, the entire enterprise is at risk. The family feels constant pressure: maintain quality, attract visitors, stay relevant. Cost: peace of mind. They cannot rest. Who paid for Biltmore's survival? We return to the central question: who actually paid for Biltmore's survival? Edith Vanderbilt. Yes, she made the painful choices, sold George's beloved forest, opened their private home to strangers, endured social judgment, worked tirelessly managing the estate for 44 years. She sacrificed George's original vision to save part of it. The Cecil family, subsequent generations, yes, they chose commitment over liquidation. Bill Cecil transformed it into a business, 1960s to 1990s. Fourth generation, Bill Jr. and Deanie, expanded the inn, 2001. Each generation reinvested rather than extracted. They sacrificed potential wealth for heritage. The workers. Yes, Biltmore employs 2,000-plus people today. Many families have worked at Biltmore for generations: grandparents, parents, children. Their livelihoods depend on Biltmore's success. They have a stake in its survival. The visitors. Yes, over 90 years, 1930 to present, tens of millions of visitors have paid admission, bought wine, stayed at the inn. Their dollars funded survival. Without them, Biltmore would have fallen like the others. The government, indirectly. The 1916 forest sale to the U.S. Forest Service provided capital when Edith needed it most. The National Gallery art storage, 1942 to 1945, provided revenue and validation during World War II. Government partnerships helped. George Vanderbilt posthumously. George built Biltmore differently from the start: working estate, not display palace; scientific forestry, sustainable revenue; year-round residence, not seasonal rents. His original vision created the foundation for adaptation. Everyone paid, but Edith paid most because she made the choice no other Gilded Age widow made: humility over pride. The lesson: why humility beats pride. Every Gilded Age estate faced the same crisis between 1930 and 1980. Operating costs exceed revenue. Adapt or die. The prideful choice: this is our private home. We will not open it to tourists. We will not commercialize our heritage. We will maintain dignity until we can no longer afford it. Then we will donate it, sell it, or walk away. Result: the Breakers, lost. Marble House, lost. Whitemarsh Hall, demolished. Linwood Hall, rotting. The humble choice: this house is more important than our pride. If opening it to the public saves it, we will open it. If commercializing it preserves it, we will commercialize it. Survival matters more than dignity. Biltmore survived, thrived. The difference: pride says, we will not change. Humility says, we will do whatever survival requires. History is clear about which wins. After 20,000 words and 130 years of history, we can now answer definitively. Why did Biltmore survive when every other Gilded Age mansion fell? Reason 1. Built differently from the start. George Vanderbilt built a working estate, not a display palace.
Forestry generated revenue. Farms produced food and income. Self-sufficiency was a goal. Year-round residence, not seasonal showpiece. The others, built for display, pure consumption, no revenue, seasonal use. Reason 2, Edith's early adaptation. Edith made hard choices early when she still had options. 1916 sold 87,000 acres to U.S. government, painful but necessary. 1930 opened to the public, humiliating but necessary. 1930s to 1950s continuously adapted, restaurants, retail, events. The others waited until crisis forced adaptation. By then, too late, no leverage, lost control. Reason 3, family commitment across generations. Each generation chose preservation over liquidation. Edith sold land open to the public. Bill Cecil transformed into a business, winery, Christmas, marketing. Fourth generation expanded the inn, events, modern amenities. The others, heirs chose to liquidate, donate, or abandon. No multi-generational commitment. Reason 4, business transformation. Bill Cecil understood museums fail, businesses survive. He transformed Biltmore from historic house museum to comprehensive tourism and hospitality enterprise. Single revenue stream of admissions to multiple streams of winery, hotel, dining, retail, and events. Seasonal attraction to year-round destination. The others remained museums dependent on donations or endowments, or remained private residences generating zero revenue. Reason 5, location. Biltmore sits in remote North Carolina. Land is beautiful but not high-value urban real estate. Demolition makes no economic sense, land not worth more than building. Isolation creates destination appeal. You travel to Biltmore, not past it. The others, especially Newport and NYC estates, urban pressure, land worth more than buildings, demolition economically rational. Reason 6, timing. Biltmore adapted early, 1930. By the time adaptive reuse became common, 1960s to 1980s, Biltmore had 40-plus years of experience operating as a public attraction. The others adapted late, 1940s to 1970s, or not at all. No expertise, no systems, failed. Reason 7, luck. Biltmore benefited from fortunate circumstances. No catastrophic fires, many estates burned. No direct war damage, stored art during World War II but not bombed. Strong tourism market in North Carolina, Smoky Mountains, Blue Ridge Parkway nearby. Family members with business acumen, especially Bill Cecil. The others, less lucky. Fires, economic crashes, family disputes, poor timing. But luck alone doesn't explain it. Many estates had luck and still failed because they lacked commitment, vision, and humility. Biltmore is not perfect. It is commercial. Some purists complain it feels too much like a theme park, not enough like a museum. It is expensive. Admission costs $70 to $90 per adult, 2024 pricing. The inn costs $300 to $800 plus per night. Not everyone can afford to visit. It is changed. George built a private retreat. Today it hosts over 1 million visitors annually. The original dream is gone. But Biltmore still stands. The house George built in 1895 is preserved, maintained, beautiful. The forests Olmsted designed are intact. The gardens bloom every spring. The estate employs 2,000 people, more than George's original vision of 100. And it is still owned by George Vanderbilt's family. 130 years after construction began, the Cecil family still owns Biltmore. No other major Gilded Age estate can say that. Why? Because when crisis came, and crisis always comes, the family made the choice others refused. Humility over pride, adaptation over tradition, service over exclusivity, survival over dignity. And those choices, made over and over across 4 generations, saved what marble and money alone could never preserve. The lesson for us: we are not Vanderbilts. Most of us will never own a 250-room chateau, but the lesson of Biltmore applies universally. What we build to prove we matter cannot survive on pride alone. Whether it's a business, a career, a reputation, a family legacy, monuments to ego require constant adaptation or they fall. Pride says, "I built this. It's mine. I won't change it." Humility says, "I built this, but it's bigger than me. I'll do whatever it takes to preserve it." Biltmore survives because Edith Vanderbilt understood this in 1914. The breakers fell because Alice Vanderbilt didn't understand it until 1948, too late. The question for each of us: what are we building? And when crisis comes, and it will we choose pride or survival? History is clear about which choice endures. If you enjoyed this investigation into why one Gilded Age mansion survived when hundreds fell, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. Your support makes these detailed stories possible. Tell me in the comments, which fallen mansion should we explore next?